Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to the final session of what has been a very successful Karachi Literary Fest. I'd like to add a couple of housekeeping points. The first is that on the screen behind us, you will see one important omission. That was quite accidental because Mia Khurshid Kusuri was supposed to be leaving immediately after the earlier session and on his way to Dubai. He's postponed that, and so he will be leaving for Dubai tomorrow. But if you can believe, his name is up there, and see the original sitting next to me on my right. The second housekeeping request I'm going to make is, it's wonderful to have your questions, but it would help us if you could write your questions with your name and hand them to any one of the red-shirted volunteers. Like that, we can then answer your questions in an appropriate way. All right? Let me begin. The concluding session that we have for KLF is what keeps us apart? India-Pakistan relations. The French statesman Georges Clemenceau once said, "War is too important to be left to the generals." Similarly, Indo-Pak relations are too dangerous and inflammable a subject to be left to the generals. We don't have any generals on this panel, so let's make this concluding session an interesting one, and let's let our hair down. India, the neighbor we can't live with, and the enemy that we can't live without. To discuss this unusual, abrasive relationship, we have, as on my left, Mr. Salman Khurshid, Indian Minister of State for External Affairs between 1993 and 1996, and later Minister for External Affairs from 2012 to 14. He is the eminent grandson of the eminent Indian President Zakir Hussain Saab. Next to him is Hina Rabbani Khar. You heard her earlier. She was our Minister of Foreign Affairs from February 2011 to March 2013. She is one of our most articulate, intelligent, and therefore underestimated foreign ministers, known more for her elegance than for her more justifiable political analyses. I have on my right Mia Khurshid Kusuri, former foreign minister, 2002 to 2007, and we've had the pleasure of listening to him talk about his book, Neither a Dove Nor a Hawk. And on the far right, Ambassador Jamshid Marker, former ambassador to the US. He's actually, Ambassador, if I may be bold, he's actually a closet Muslim. And the reason I say it is that he has been married to many countries many times. Ambassador Marker has the unique distinction, according to the Guinness Book of Records, of having been our ambassador to more countries than any other ambassador in the world. We have a representative panel, so I'll go straight into it. And my first question is going to be you, Ambassador Marker, if I may. We have not gone to war with any of the numerous countries that you were accredited to. So what is your recipe for peaceful coexistence?
Keep your head down. No, that was not meant to be facetious. It's not easy to maintain peace, as the experts sitting here will know. If you want me to break relations with a country, I can do it in 2 minutes. Absolutely. Maintaining peace and, better still, understanding is a much more difficult and a much longer process. And I think, can you hear me now?
Mike's zara aage kar lijiye. Lady, madam.
Sorry.
No. Yeah, he'll put it. That's it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I can certainly hear me. So I say that again. because that's important, that to break relations with a country of your accreditation or any other thing only takes 5 minutes. To maintain it and keep it is a different matter altogether. At one time when I was in Moscow, and we were going through a particularly difficult time, weather-wise also. There was a fierce snowstorm, and I was summoned to the Kremlin to give an addressing down, which we got frequently in those days. And it went on and on. We had a good exchange, a full and frank exchange is the way they described it. And my wife, who was at home, it was 11 at night, snowing, and she got worried, and she called my minister, Mansoor, the late Mansoor. I want to pay tribute to him. He's one of the finest officers that we've had, and it's very sad that he passed away a time ago. And she said, I'm very worried that my husband's been called there. He's at the Kremlin. He's wondering what's going on. And Mansoor, was calm and cool as ever, said, if he's gone for a long time, then I wouldn't worry, Begum Sahaba, because a declaration of war takes only 2 minutes.
Lovely. You've mentioned that you can break a relationship within 2 minutes, but it takes much longer to build it up. It sounds like the recipe for a good marriage. Mia Saab, what do you regard, in a few words, what is the recipe for peaceful coexistence between countries?
Well, peaceful coexistence. Take the partner, whichever partner you're thinking of, with all the warts and whatever the advantages be. It's always a mixed cup. You cannot have a human relationship or relationship with any other country where you will not face difficulties. It's a question of adjustment, and you have to realize what the environment is. And therefore, I am a strong believer of taking cognizance of ground realities. If you take cognizance of ground realities, that is the strongest insurance for peace. Some of my liberal friends, that's why my book is called Neither a Hawk Nor a Dove, thought that peace could be had for the asking. That's not the case. Bertrand Russell did say, I'd rather be red than dead. But in fact, if you are weak, there is no peace.
Yes.
And therefore, one of the things which have helped Pakistan in its environment is to try and maintain a level of strategic balance.
Yes.
Because without that, there are too many temptations. So I think what we found out is I try to understand India, the second thing, to understand who you're talking to. I spend a lot of time. I read a lot about India. I follow Indian news. So that when I'm talking to them, I can empathize with what they're saying and then put across my perspective to make them empathize what our problems are. That is the only way around that.
Salman Bhai, what do you regard as the single recipe for peaceful coexistence? Not necessarily between India and Pakistan alone, we'll come to that.
I understand. I think one important thing is to keep as much away from the media as possible, particularly in our times. And I think that it's very important. Personal chemistry between leaders is extremely important. But leaders shouldn't mistake personal chemistry for objective conditions for peace. I think if you keep a balance between those two, there is no substitute for personal chemistry. And I think the book that Kasturi Saab has written is an adequate proof of that. Yes. The chemistry disappeared because the people disappeared. Otherwise, we might have had a more successful conclusion. but at the same time, the objective conditions have to be understood. I think one important last thing is that we do tend to make a mistake that we think that our shenanigans will be appreciated by people at large. That's not true. That's a wrong perception that political leaders have. And I think that if you took a poll here, a straw poll here, and asked about what people want, they would want peace. And for any leader to think that you can excite and provoke people into wanting war, I think that's a very big mistake.
Indeed. Thank you. Hena, any single recipe that you can think of from your experience and also from your own perception?
Of peaceful
For
coexistence.
peaceful coexistence, yeah.
Okay, for peaceful coexistence, clearly what you need is, first of all, to get out of, I can't help but look at it from an India-Pakistan perspective.
Okay.
And the fact is that Pakistan and India, in some way, cannot have been made not to be able to coexist peacefully because they were, in some ways, too joined together in many, many ways. Okay, so it's a fear of, that the fact that culturally, geographically, historically, there's so much that is similar that there needs to be a fear inculcated into the differences. So I think the differences have to be imagined and really sort of instilled, and that's what the states have done.
Okay. Hena, I'm going to further the question. Indo-Pak relations remind me of a remark made by the late Diana, Princess of Wales, to Martin Bashir during that famous interview. In it, she said of her marriage to Prince Charles, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. We have become reconciled in Pakistan to a threesome: India, Pakistan, and the Pakistan Army. Hina, will our elected governments ever enjoy the conjugal bliss of bilateralism with India?
Okay, before that I have to ask the question, will I ever go through an interview or a sitting where I will not be asked about the Pakistan military? I've never served in the Pakistan military, really. But yeah, I think simply, there is a historical perspective there, right? You cannot undo the fact that 30 years of the 67-year history that Pakistan has was under a military regime, right? Which means that the military in that time, with some gaps, penetrated institutions and civilian systems deeply and left a mark in incapacitating them to quite an extent, right? Okay. So when you incapacitate an institution and you build capacity of the other, what is going to be there? A gaping hole. A huge gap of capacity between the civilian institution and the military institutions. I believe the Pakistani military is truly a very, very strong institution, and it means obviously well for the country. That is what it is there for. But again, you famously quoted the French general. I believe Churchill is supposed to have said something very similar, that war is too important a business to be left to generals. Now, military minds are trained in a certain way. They are trained to say yes and go, shoot on order. Political minds are trained in the complete opposite way, right? Nuances, negotiation, wait, give time, give respect, wait for your turn, etc., etc., etc. Now, I was just recently reading or rereading. I read General Musharraf's book many, many years back, and it was mentioned in an article how he continues to say that Kargil did a lot to highlight the Kashmir issue, and it was because of the fact that Kargil happened that, to my mind, it highlighted the Kashmir issue in quite the opposite manner, right? Yeah. So I would not choose to highlight the Kashmir issue in that way. I think Kashmir issue until 1989 was very well highlighted diplomatically. It's a strong case of human rights, of freedom, of etc., etc. But when you put the other element of violence and everything else in it, you're actually not solving it. You're actually, in my mind, creating more, spoiling the chances of being able to resolve the issue. So, yes, the military is not supposed to be trained to have a role in foreign policy. However, in Pakistan, historically, that has been the case. I have to just also say that I have found, however, I have to talk from my own experience, that if the civilian institution, the person and the institution, take themselves seriously and have faith and, in whatever, in their institutional value, then to be quite honest, I don't think the military can or does want to force you to do the opposite. They also want to do what is the best for the country. So rational, logical discussion with the military and everyone else is in some ways, both useful.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I just interject? May I just interject here?
Please.
The ménage à trois could be broken up if we gave the Pakistan military a companion to play with, and if we brought them closer to the Indian military, and the two could sit down and sort out their things, perhaps we can get on with our work.
Indeed.
I just have to do a one-liner on that one, since you did. Okay, I also have to say that the role of the Pakistani military is on the decrease, and the role of the Indian military is on the increase. And I will end with that.
Okay, right. Mia Saab, in your book, you had mentioned that J.N. Dixit, he was at that time the Indian National Security Advisor, had told you that Musharraf, who happened to be president, should continue in uniform. And your remark was that he implied that the peace process between the two countries had been helped by the president continuing to retain his uniform. Should therefore, what the implication is, should the foreign minister be an army general? After all, we've had one good example, and that was late Sahibzada Yaqub Ali Khan, whom we all mourn, who was a very able foreign minister, albeit under General Zia and Muin Qureshi. Does the military persona add to the force of the Foreign Office in that sense?
No, that was a special circumstance.
Yeah,
If
okay.
you're talking of Sahibzada Yaqub.
Ji, bilkul.
Now, you see, let's talk of another question that's often asked, but I won't go into details because that is whether Pakistan Foreign Office makes foreign policy. So in case of Sahibzada Yaqub, he was foreign minister at a time when the covert war on Afghanistan had taken place.
Absolutely.
The war was not sanctioned by United States Congress. It was a CIA operation.
Yes.
And therefore, it would be unrealistic to expect the head of CIA meeting the foreign minister of Pakistan.
Yes.
The head of CIA would come and meet the head of ISI in Pakistan.
Yes.
So much so that at the time of Geneva Accords, Secretary Schultz had to be briefed on Afghanistan, the Secretary of State of US, because the CIA that was handling it. Now, as a result, therefore, the impression grew that, it is the army. Now, what was Sahibzada's role? Sahibzada was a retired Lieutenant General of the Pakistan Army. Yes. He happened to be the foreign minister at that time.
That's right.
And in that period, he became a conduit. But otherwise, it leads to a larger question. If you allow me, I
Yes,
can
of
answer.
course, please.
Does Foreign Office make foreign policy? That's a very basic question. That's why I fairly addressed it in my book. Yes, Foreign Office makes foreign policy, but all over the world, where you have troubled borders, like the United States, they've got into trouble with General MacArthur, and more recently, they've got into trouble with General McChrystal in Afghanistan. Look at India. I wouldn't spare that, you see, because we were always told that Pakistan Army is a hindrance. I remember that I was told by India on high authority that the Siachen formula that we had proposed was doable. The day I landed in Delhi, General J.J. Singh, the then Chief of Staff of the Indian Army, addressed a press conference and said something which was completely different from what the civil government in India was telling me. So what does it tell you? It tells you wherever there are disturbed borders, the military will tend to acquire more and more authority. But for example, in dealing with European Union, in dealing with 185 countries in the world, it's not the Pakistan Army. Why? The reason is very simple. Information is power. And if a minister is prepared to stick his neck out and is not prepared and not as scared of losing his job, he is much better informed than anybody in Pakistan, Foreign Secretary and the Foreign Minister. Because early in the morning, 9 o'clock, you come to your office, you have the best analysis from all over the world on your table, secret telegrams. Now, in the absence of information, no coherent policy can be framed. Even when the military has been in charge, they always need position papers. It's not the ISI, then they ask the Foreign Office. The Foreign Office has information. The Foreign Office puts alternatives before the government of the day. So there is no substitute for Foreign Office. And I think I was lucky to have a Foreign Office at the time who largely disagreed, but where they didn't, it was my duty. I was a civilian head. And there were areas where I did not agree with some people in the Foreign Office on, for example, policy to India. And I was determined to steer the path. And I would give credit to President Musharraf that he allowed me to operate as an effective foreign minister. And I won't forget that just because he's out of power and it's become fashionable to kick him. He allowed those conditions to prevail. So therefore, the Pakistan army, yes, on Afghanistan and on India, where we have troubled borders. But when you're dealing with European Union, you don't have an army chief go and address European Parliament. And there are so many important relationships. So I would say, yes, where you have a difficult situation, the army will increase its role. The first man to brief President Bush was not the Secretary of State. It was George Tenet, the head of CIA. Early in the morning, he would be the first man received because America had disturbed situations in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Okay. Ambassador Jamshed Marker, the Foreign Office, as Khurshid Sahib has said, offers options. Okay? And that's not necessarily concomitant with a policy. The policy emerges from those options. With Bollywood and the ambassador say in all your positions, were you always looking over your shoulder?
No. I didn't, because of the conditions under which I worked.
Okay.
I was convinced that whatever decision was taken, certainly I was fortunate in my time, that there was a debate. And my views very frequently, I'm now proud to say, were rejected. But at least it meant that there was a debate. And the issues varied so much, especially in foreign policy. Everything from human rights to commerce to all kinds of issues.
Absolutely.
And we were fortunate. And here I must say, and I've paid this tribute before, and I'll do it again and again as long as I live, that Pakistan has probably the finest foreign service that exists.
You're absolutely right, sir. Absolutely right.
It's been, it's suffered a great deal. It's really been bullied, but it has emerged with its head high, dignity high, and above all, its professionalism.
So, Ambassador, you remind me of the two psychiatrists who met in a New York street, and one said to the other, "You're all right, how am I?" So may I ask Salman Bhai, as an Indian who happens to be a Muslim, but will we ever see peace in our lifetime between our two countries? Will Indo-Pak relations always be a state of no war, masquerading as peace? And will our foreign policy always be the product of what you describe in your book as hit and miss tactics?
Well, I hope not. I think the sense that I've had in 2 days that I've been here meeting a variety of people from different walks of life is to ask myself this question: with if these are the kind of people we are dealing with, why are we not friends? And all I could think of was the book by E.M. Foster, Passage to India, that there is an inevitability of knowing that we will be friends. But there are intermediaries and intermediate events that tell you that it won't be now, it'll be sometime in the future. I do believe that we should not be impatient, we should be consistent, continue to work in a sustained manner. We shouldn't get disappointed if something goes wrong. We should know that one day we will overcome. And I think that's the spirit that you will find across in India. That's the spirit I find here in Pakistan. If the politicians just took a back seat for a while, perhaps the people will work out how to be friends.
Indeed. So what you're saying in effect, Salman Bhai, is jam yesterday, jam tomorrow, but no jam today. India and Pakistan cannot help playing an important role in Asia. If India and Pakistan follow a contrary policy and are opposed to each other, they will obviously be neutralizing each other and cannot play that role. This conflict and wasteful effort will wipe us out from the face of the earth. This observation was made before the Indian nuclear test of Porkhan and ours at Chagai. It was made in 1948 by Pandit Nehru. Henna, how do we avoid what Henry Kissinger once described as the dialogue of the deaf? How do we establish what Mani Shankar defines as an uninterruptible dialogue? And how do we ensure the success of a formula which doesn't end up as 1 + 1 = 0?
Sure. Okay, first of all, the Mani Shankar line is something that I used, I remember, on reaching New Delhi, because clearly for anyone who's done an analysis of how Indo-Pak talks have been and what has come out of it, understands that it's not like there hasn't been an effort, and it's not like we haven't been able to literally feel, as Kasuri Saab describes in his book also, that it was just like a few, that you were just about to achieve what is, peace in one form or the other, or just dispute resolution. And yet, every time, we have failed, okay? So I refuse to be encouraged by the fact that in the last 67 years, despite all the multiplicity of efforts in every regime, and every regime believes they did quite a bit to reach a dialogue process which led to some results with India, and history books are filled with them, accounts are filled with them, okay? There's the Swaran Singh, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, 5 rounds of trying to solve the Kashmir dispute in 1963, which is almost very similar to what happened in the Musharraf era, right? Yes, and yet we tend to think that every time we're doing it, we have to reinvent a new wheel. And yet, so I'm sorry, maybe because, I've been born after 1971. I don't have the patience to wait for another 70 years before India and Pakistan finally get it. And finally, something actually does happen. It really doesn't matter in the end analysis as to how much effort went in. The result is that the two countries are at each other's throat and have been. It takes a Pathankot, it takes Pathankot, it takes Mumbai, it takes a Samjhota, it takes an incident in Balochistan, it takes a small, big, large incident to just put us back in our deep-seated positions of rivals, of it's a mutually assured destruction philosophy as we play it out. So I'm not saying what we intend. What we intend is good. I believe that, right? But how it plays out is that the two countries, no matter how much we've gone to and fro, have never really been able to come to a point where we have even solved one dispute. On the other hand, we have, with time, increased the basket of disputes that we have. How old is Kargil? Yes. Right? How old is Siachen? So to convince ourselves that, yes, it's, only a matter of time, no, it's not. Until unless we're able to do a deep-seated change in the narrative that we feed our children and the states propel, both equally effectively, this has been the reality of India and Pakistan. And as I said in the beginning, I think there's so much similarities between the two countries. And, forget everything else. Look at the last 5 years pre-independence. Do we teach our children that who was how close to accepting Dominion status and who wanted something else? And if you read our history books, it's almost like straight-jacketed. Jinnah wanted one thing and one thing alone, and Gandhi and Nehru wanted one thing and one thing alone. One was anti-Hindu and one was anti-Muslim. It wasn't like that. Jinnah was the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity till. So I don't want to take more time, but all I'm saying is that I think it's about time that we stop, giving ourselves comfort by saying, yes, it's about to happen, and it will happen one day. I think it's time that we see what are the hindrances? Why is it not happening today? We boast the largest population collectively of the poor in the world. India as a country, us no far behind just because we are less population. And yet we have something to congratulate ourselves.
Okay. We'll be coming back to this. Yes, we have invented, you talk about reinventing the wheel. Pakistan and India have reinvented the wheel. The unfortunate thing is it's a square wheel. It doesn't work. Can I come to the point now of secret channels and twin-track diplomacy? Mian Sahib, in your book, you had talked about the channels which have in fact survived every conflict between India and Pakistan. There are 2 examples I can give you: the Indus Waters Commission and, of course, the secret channel that was between our 2 governments. The most recent being Satish Lamba Sahib and Tariq Aziz Sahib, when they came that close, am I right, to a resolution of the position on Jammu and Kashmir. Can I ask you, because you mentioned this in your book, but how can we achieve that resolution what remains to be done for us to be able to achieve it?
You see, because I have a different mindset. I'm a born optimist. Number two, you cannot deal with Pakistan-India relations unless you have a large degree of optimism. That is absolutely essential, number one. Number two, I'm not going to give up. Why? Because I saw it from such close quarters.
Yes.
Because it can be done, so what does it require? It requires statesmen on both sides who have the willpower, the political will. Now, whatever objections we may have to Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the baggage that he carries, once he's convinced, now this is quite exceptional, his visit to Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif.
In Rawalpindi.
Only a strong leader could have done it, considering the fact that his supporters back home, I know what they are like, because when my Bombay launch was there, I experienced it firsthand. So, and a lot of people are very unhappy. Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh and its various allied groups, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, Bajrang Dal, Shiv Sena, they're very unhappy. So, if he can do it, it means that he has the electoral mandate. He doesn't depend on anybody. And the fact that he came here, despite that Pathankot happened, but what is the silver lining? Pathankot was different from others because both countries realized that, there are people who will not let that happen. So what's the way out? The way out is what we achieved in 2005 in Delhi with Dr. Manmohan Singh and President Musharraf, the joint statement on irreversibility of the peace process.
Yes.
My friend Mani Shankar repeatedly says, no, we uninterrupted and uninterruptible dialogue, and he gives the example Panmunjom. I agree with him. But how do you concretize it? We had concretized it through a joint statement of the two countries, irreversibility, which means that we had anticipated that when we come near, something will happen. And therefore, you need to ignore. I tried to ignore it. Samjhota Express took place day before I was going. I was told to cancel it. I said, no, I will not. If I do, I'll be playing into the hands of the terrorists. So my suggestion is a strong leadership, and that Prime Minister Modi has, despite my reservations regarding his past, amply demonstrated. And if Pathankot is an example, and I think Pakistan Army is a part of it. For example, the appointment of the National Security Advisor, who recently retired from the Pakistan Army and was a corps commander in Quetta, which is a very sensitive position, I think is an indication that Pakistan Army means business, which means if you can have an honorable peace with India, it's on board, which is what I have written in my book.
Absolutely.
So I don't think that we should give up and say, no, it won't happen. Yes, I agree with some of the observations made by Hina, because, one has gone through experiences. And as she says, she wasn't born at a certain time. She was my son's class fellow. So maybe I have a greater confidence, and also because I saw it happen. And it will happen sooner rather than later.
Mia Sahib, if it's any consolation to you, I was born after Hina.
You are younger than my son then.
Absolutely, young at heart. Okay, what you mentioned is that foreign policy, it's an act of courage. It was an act of courage of Prime Minister Modi to stop in Lahore, go to Rawalpindi. It was an equal act of courage for our Prime Minister to wear a pink turban at a wedding. It takes courage to do that in Lahore, I assure you. If then we are talking about individual acts of courage, Ambassador Marka, I'm going to address you, sir. If we're talking about individual acts of courage, then in a sense we're going back to the Mahabharata, or the medieval times, when armies didn't bother to fight with each other, they just sent out one champion, and the other party sent out their best champion, and whoever won, the army conceded. Who, in your opinion, sir, would be the most qualified champion from either side?
I've been thinking naturally. At 93, you have an opportunity to look back.
Of course.
And seeing what's happened. And I've ended up by being optimistic. And I tell you why. It's not just an expression of optimism. But if you think that what this subcontinent has been through in the last 70 years,
Yes.
of the difficulties that it has met, of the setbacks in our relationship, and yet it has survived. And when the time comes, there is some sixth sense, seventh sense, 77th sense that brings us back to the course of sanity.
Absolutely.
Now we've got everything. When I say we say everything, I mean we have a hydrogen bomb and we have a nuclear bomb, and have had for a long time, both of us. Anywhere in most other situations, including the so-called civilized Western countries who have had wars, we have managed to stay away from it. We have managed to now. Is it because we eat the same kind of food? Upon what meat does our Caesar feed?
Indeed.
Or is it because we speak the same language, largely? Or is it because there is a sense of tolerance,
Absolutely.
which is ingrained in us and which comes out at critical moments?
Realism. Yeah, realism.
And I think that this is what is happening.
Okay.
That it asserts itself from time to time. We do the most foolish things, the most stupid things, the most unacceptable things, and yet somehow after this, run out nahi hota.
Indeed.
We managed to get to the stumps.
As you know, Ambassador Marker is a member of the PTI. He uses run out as an analogy. Okay. Anyway, when we're talking about single champions, it of course raises this question of, in 1973, for example, and in secret diplomacy, a number of countries have used this device. They fielded individual champions. The Americans fielded Henry Kissinger. The Vietnamese fielded Lou Duc Tho. Anwar Sadat representing the Egyptians, Menachem Begin representing the Israelis, Yasser Arafat, Itzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, the Israelis and the Palestinians, Malala Yousafzai, our champion, and on the Indian side, Kailash Satyarthi. The reason why I've mentioned all of them is that all of them won the Nobel Peace Prize. All of them were lauded for their individual efforts as Peace Prize winners. I'm going to ask each one of you, who will be the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize for achieving peace between India and Pakistan, and when? Salman Bhai.
Well, the trend in India now
company excluded.
to answer. Yeah, I know. I was going to mention you, but the trend in India now for answering these kind of questions, whether electorally or otherwise, is Aam Aadmi. They've wiped us out in Delhi. They wiped the BJP out in Delhi, and they seem to now want to expand their territory into other parts of India. But that's the catchphrase today. Aam Aadmi, or the common person, common man and woman. And I think that the only way we will get peace is if the common people of India and Pakistan join hands, and therefore the Nobel Prize has to go to them.
Wonderful. Hina, up.
Okay, realistically
This is not
speaking,
part of the list, by
yes,
the way.
yes,
Yeah, he's
I
not
understand.
eligible.
No, to be quite
No
honest,
Oscars to
it
put.
will be, it will have to be the politician, the two politicians, both synchronized when they decide to be statesmen instead of politicians, right?
Okay.
And I truly believe, so it can be Nawaz Sharif and Modi,
Okay.
Prime Minister Modi, because the day they decide that they're going to be statesmen instead of politicians, and frankly speaking, I'm currently in order to respect all the optimism, I'm currently exceptionally optimistic because I think for the first time we have decided to go in the opposite direction of what we typically do. Typically Pakistan says, no, we will not take any evidence, all of this is incorrect, we cannot do anything. And typically India says, starts. This time India, because Prime Minister Modi, just by virtue of landing in Lahore, has become a stakeholder in peace. And I completely believe that he has the ability to deliver like no one else.
Okay. So, on the one side, Hena's observation is Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif.
Any two prime ministers, when they decide to become statesmen,
now you're diluting it. Now you're saying, hang on a moment.
Nawaz
You
Sharif
gave me
not
two
getting a
names.
Nobel.
I've asked for two names. Now the question I'm going to the writer is, when?
It can be within weeks if they want it to be.
All right.
Literally, within weeks. I mean, as I said, the wheel doesn't need to be reinvented. A lot of good work has been done.
Excellent.
On practically every of the disputes, each one of the disputes.
Right. So we're very close. It's just that we seem to be standing in opposite directions, looking in opposite directions. But let's ensure. Khurshid Bhai, apart from you, who else should be getting the Nobel Peace Prize?
Okay. Frankly, I think it depends on how fair the Nobel Committee is.
They've rigged, are they?
They awarded a Nobel Prize to Obama without his having done a thing. If that is the criteria, God help us.
It's a triumph of hope over experience.
So apart from whoever happens to be at that time who signs this, it will be a very unfair committee which ignores you. Some of you may not like to hear it. Manmohan Singh and Musharraf. It will be a very unfair committee.
The two M's.
It could be four of them.
Absolutely.
Those at the moment and those who started it.
Absolutely.
But I don't know if they are going to be that fair-minded.
Well, they'll, I'm sure, take your observations into consideration. Ambassador Marker, who would be the two people that you would single out, one on either side of the border?
I've been in line for this for 50 years, but nobody seems to have noticed. No, the Nobel Prize is a complicated thing. It's never straightforward, unless you are a brilliant chemist, which I am not, or a brilliant physicist, which I am not. In politics, it's perhaps the most complicated and never entirely satisfied. If I went through the list of Nobel Peace Prize winners, I doubt if I'd give more than 10 of them.
Yourself?
Over this. Because there is, it's so complicated and so difficult and so prejudiced. But
But give me two names. One from India, one from Pakistan, in the light of your experience.
I think India and Pakistan.
Excellent. Both countries, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think back to it's a bit of a crude story, but it's true, that we were once at the UN and discussing, I think in one of the delegates' lounges or something, when a supercilious Western delegate said, we are getting fed up with you Indians and Pakistanis blaming us for everything. And so, to his misfortune, Bhutto happened to be sitting there. And we're getting fed up of you snapping at our heels. So Bhutto said, be careful, next time we'll aim higher. But the point is that there is that instinctive, call it preservation.
Yes.
Instinct, or political preservation instinct, I don't know.
Okay.
But it is this that gives me the confidence.
Okay. I've been told about question and answer, but I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the moderator. We have some very intelligent people here whom you've come to listen to, and I'm going to exercise that judgment. I'm going to ask a question now, and this is born of something that I read in Salman Bhai's book, and of course one is aware of it otherwise. Salman Bhai, you mentioned in your book that half your population, and in India's population is what now? How much is it? 1.25?
1.25.
1.25 billion. That means almost 600 million of them are under the age of 25. Now that is more than our existing total population, 4 times our population, more 3 times. Half our population is under the age of 25. And neither of them knows each other. And I'm going to test it for you. How many of you sitting here as practicing Muslims, without losing your faith, can tell me the correct order of the avatars of Vishnu? Can any of you tell me how many avatars there are? All right. 10. The last one you've not taken is Kalki, who will come on the Day of Judgment. How many of you can tell me how many Sikh gurus there are? 10. But I gave the game away with the other one. How many of you can tell me the difference between the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavad Puran? That is what I'm trying to say. That we have institutionalized ignorance on either side of the border. In the case of the Indians, they do know more about Islam. Hindus do know more about Islam. Here, it's a bit like living in a boys' boarding school. You don't see girls. We just have one faith, and we do not acknowledge, and we don't take the trouble of learning about others. So how can we rectify this? I'm going to ask Salman Bhai, how do we rectify this, what I regard as institutionalized ignorance on either side? How can we break that barrier?
Well, it sounds a little bit too late for some of us, but maybe we just start a more extensive interface and interaction amongst our young people. If we can make exceptions in visa regimes for college students and school students coming across in growing numbers and going from here to India in growing numbers, and pick up something which is like a rediscovery. It'll have to be rediscovery. There are people of the last few generations who know about the past, and there is the generation that is completely oblivious of the past, except having heard some distant tremors about what their parents had been through. So I think that there has to be very extensive exchange, determined exchange between young people. We have some institutional links, but just simply young people being thrown at each other, and you would see within 5 to 10 years, you'd see a remarkable difference happen. And as far as ignorance is concerned, I would be happy to take your precepts back home about being ignorant about each other in India. We're not entirely knowledgeable about each other in India, and certainly the young generation coming together will solve problems both at home, and I hope for you here in Pakistan, but also solve problems between our two countries.
Thank you.
And perhaps then we would be able to say that the children of our two countries get the Nobel Prize.
Excellent. Hina, what would be your observation for bringing the youth together?
I think it will have to be two-pronged. I'm going to go a step, before this, and to say that also to spend some time on how our education system works,
okay,
and what we teach our children. Because I think the way we teach our children history is in some ways exceptionally silo-oriented, right? We don't, and there's no concept of comparative religion, etc.
No,
so I think
no.
that is certainly an important thing, and clearly it's a challenge for India also, because one keeps on hearing how, within their curriculum also that's happening. Because you see, until unless you will instill inquiry into the children when they are at that stage, and I would love for our children and students generally to read much more than we typically do. So that's stage one. And stage two, obviously, literally, as he said, I will use his words, throw people at each other,
Okay.
Now from college students and school students, you cannot have a problem as far as issuing them visa is concerned, but we make it exceptionally difficult for people to be able to get visas at any level. I mean, you just saw Anupam Kher not being able to come here for many reasons. So we need to just be able to make that exception. At least that's an easy place to start. College students, school students, no visas required. Once you get to interact with each other, you will get to know more about their religion, more about their customs, more about how similar also they are.
Okay. At the Kasauli Literary Festival, an Indian friend, Barkha Roy, she confronted me suddenly and she said, "I'm coming to Pakistan. Whether you give me a visa or not, I'm coming to Pakistan." I said, "Barkha, don't get uppity about it, please. There are two categories of people who do not need visas to come to Pakistan. You and the Indian Army." Mia Saf, you had one of the largest of the private school systems. Would you subscribe to this view that we should have a greater exchange? I know you were doing it, but a greater exchange of youth so that we can capitalize on the youth dividend?
I will answer that.
Yeah.
But first of all, you asked a very perceptive question.
I hope so.
I agree with both the panelists, but we are not living in an
Perfect
ideal
world.
world. I have to give one response, and that response proved successful. That's based on my experience. Yes, I could list many: trade and commerce and movies and culture. You can have a large list. There is one thing which you can do which will have a dramatic impact. When I was foreign minister, I insisted on a liberal visa regime. 100,000 Pakistanis went to India. 100,000 went to Pakistan. You know the result? The consequence. 3 years only. And what did I see? Cricket matches are normally substitute between Pakistan and India for a battlefield. In the Lahore cricket match, India won. Some of the Indians were scared of coming out to the Qaddafi Stadium. But what happened? The young men of Lahore ran across the field with Indian and Pakistani flags. Why did it happen? 3 years of liberal visa regime, people getting to know each other. So that is one simple solution. If I have to give you why, because there are 20 things which can be done, and both of them are right. But this is one particular thing which can be done, and which now you ask me about. We are already doing it.
Indeed.
For example, at the BNU, Beacon House National University, which is a non-profit, first liberal arts university of Pakistan. It had to be non-profit. Nobody would pay for liberal arts. First liberal arts university, we have instituted, with the help of Madanjeet Institute, a SARC scholarship scheme. There might be 30 or so students currently. In fact, the only exception was India. And it's such institutionalized hurdles that when I was foreign minister, some Indian happened to got admission. So every time, but they wouldn't give it to a student for a long time. At the end of 3 months, she was ringing me, "Can you talk to Interior Ministry or whoever to renew the visa?" And this was only as a tourist.
Okay.
Unless you change that situation,
Status.
there is no way that you will be able to remove these bottlenecks. So one simple solution, liberal visa regime, in addition to all that they have said.
Excellent. Ambassador Marker, you confess to being 93 years old, but with the heart of a 25-year-old. So on the assumption that you're still 25 and you are actually multiples of 25, would you subscribe to this view that we do need to have interchange between younger generation for better understanding?
Well, one of the most depressing things that I find, I told you earlier about the optimism that I have.
Yes.
The depressing thing has been the increase in the trust deficit between our two countries. That this I've seen with alarm, the way this trust deficit has increased. I said earlier, we eat the same food, but there are certain things in which we don't trust each other either.
Absolutely.
And the first and simplest way to do it, as Khurshid Sahib has said, increase the contacts between the people.
Okay.
It's because there is really nothing to stop us from liking each other, but certainly to prevent us from disliking each other any further.
Absolutely.
And it's almost like sometimes one feels that one's right there at the switch, about to switch it on, and somebody has left it off.
Indeed.
That we need to, there is nothing in our way. The language is the same, the literature is the same, the swear words are the same. You know, it's, it's much easier for us.
Yes. So you mentioned the trust deficit. So just before we conclude, and I make a formal vote of thanks to this eminent and very articulate panel, I'm going to say a few words. Somebody had once said, wars are made in the minds of men, and therefore peace must begin in the minds of men. And I'm going to give you a quotation. A borderless society with no divisions of caste and community can only arise from borderless minds. Love, patience, good laws, and fair justice are the best instruments for our society to transform itself into a borderless community, where hands that serve are better than lips that pray. And this statement was made by Dr. Abdul Kalam, the former President of India. So my tribute to him and in his memory. I'm going to first thank our team members, panel members here, Saman Khurshid Saab, Hena Rabbani Khar, Mia Khurshid Kasuri Saab, and the young Ambassador Jamshed Marcus Saab. And I'm going to conclude, because it is the final session, and I'm going to conclude on a rather naughty note, with Mia Saab's permission. In 1977, the Pakistan Times published a news item in which Air Marshal Asghar Khan nominated Mr. Khurshid Kasuri as the PNA candidate for National Assembly 111-1 in opposition to Mr. Bhutto. You had mentioned Mr. Bhutto, sir? A news item appeared, as I said, the news item read that the Tehreek-e-Insaf chief, the Pakistan Times said, thought that Mr. Khurshid Ali Kasuri was more educated than Mr. Bhutto. He received his education in 4 foreign universities, including Oxford and Cambridge. He spoke better English and was as well dressed as the People's Party chairman. On page 26 of your book, sir.
I didn't say that.
No, I'm saying Pakistan Times did.
Pakistan Times, okay.
And it was quoting Air Marshal Asghar Khan.
Okay.
On page 26 of your current book, sir, you recount Malik Ghulam Jilani's remark that when Mr. Bhutto entered his drawing room, Malik Saab said, "Oh, the second best dressed man has just come in." Both you and Bhutto asked Malik Jilani, "Well, who's the best then?" And Malik Saab pointed towards you.
And I knew Bhutto Saab would never forgive me for that.
Absolutely. So, closing question to all of you here, and this is a fun question upon which to conclude this brilliant Karachi Literary Festival. Closing question: of all the 3 foreign ministers that we've had, the late Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, his sartorial competitor, Mr. Khurshid Kasuri, or the ineffably soignée Hina Rabbani Khar, who gains your vote as Pakistan's best dressed foreign minister?
No, that's a difficult one. That's not fair.
All right. Well, I thought we'd end on
I think you should. I think you should transfer this to India for a vote.
Okay.
Then there won't be any.
Well, they were only focused on her handbag, which was very unfair. Anyway, unfair. All right. Let me just conclude. And I know I speak for all of you. I certainly speak for us here sitting as panelists, for all of the other panelists, and for all of you sitting in the audience. May I just thank Amina Said and Asif Farooqi Saab for organizing this festival. Amina, through you, may we also offer our thanks to everyone at OUP for organizing this so seamlessly. I'd like to thank the booksellers unsung, who have been displaying the books that we labored to write. I'd like to thank the security people for protecting us from each other. I'd like to thank the volunteers who every day were here and have been here since the morning. And let me finally thank the Avari family, the two Avari brothers. You have done a wonderful job in making the hotel available. And may I just say, because I had the privilege of knowing him, that you have made your grandfather very proud. Gone? Well, I've already said. Thank you very much indeed. And now, Amina, I will leave the stage for you for the concluding session. Thank you.